Thank you, Rodney. I will be giving the paper, but this stems from work that I have done collaboratively with Marta. With this paper, I would really like to start taking the opportunity to reflect a little bit on the digital heritage research strand, on where we've been in the past, where we are now, and where we could fruitfully go moving forward at the time of the data deluge. Now, the field of digital heritage has started to emerge more formally in the 1990s. And at that point in time, it was more focused on trying to unpick the impact of digital technologies within and on museum and gallery context. Since then, the field has grown substantially, primarily, however, continuing to look at two linked topics. One is the digitization of analog resources, and the other is digital engagement with the past through those resources and other internet-enabled objects and spaces. Literature instead, focusing on digitally born and digitally enabled research, has remained more limited. It is still so today, and those few studies that do exist tend to either look into overarching and theoretically rich problems without, however, much empirical grounding, or they instead focus on developing digital methods and tools and applying them empirically, but without necessarily really engaging conceptually fully with the problems that are very pressing within heritage and heritage research. Now, of course, these two approaches, both of them are entirely legitimate, and they have contributed positively to advance the field. But in my view, neither of them seems sufficient at this point to explore the complexities of heritage theory and practice in a world of big data. I think we could take a more fruitful approach going forward that tries to really join up a rich understanding of heritage theory and practice, which is absolutely paramount to frame meaningful research questions and put forward rich interpretations, and also a direct, so non-fully outsourced engagement with technicity, understood as the technology considered in its efficacy and also in its operating functioning. In a world of big data, technicity is at the same time part of both the methodology that we use and the subject we investigate. And it is for these reasons that we cannot prescind from a first-hand engagement with it. So on the one end, I think there is the need to try and overcome the issue of theory being detached from the substance of practice and only existing in its formal essence. On the other hand, it is also important to overcome what might seem acritical tullifications and research that is devoid of that anthropological, sociological, archaeological, and philosophical core that is that is key within heritage research, and that constitutes the breeding ground of heritage research. So in the next 15 minutes, I will try to argue this position and reflect on what it means to navigate big data in a hands-on way, developing and adapting research software critically to undertake research in heritage. And I will ask, what is the value of big data for heritage research? What are the implications of its use in terms of research design and methodology, and also in epistemological terms? And I look to address these themes and questions drawing on the digital heritage research done as part of Ancient Identities, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, really aimed at exploring the variable ways in which people interact and value the ancient past today in Britain. Now, the digital heritage strand of this project has been structured in two main components. One component has aimed to capture how activities such as heritage site visitation that were explored through offline ethnography by my colleague Kate Sharp in Durham may have also unfolded online. So in this case, we try to mirror, if you like, and to some extent follow the ethnographic work that was done offline. This approach is inspired by Christine Hind's work in ethnography for the internet, where Hind really underlines the importance of not seeing the digital and the non-digital as two distinct worlds, but keeping in mind that human activities can really cross both online and offline fields, sometimes in fluid ways. The second component of our research instead is digital only, and it has aimed to examine political values of the ancient past through the collection of big data and of social media data in particular. My discussion will focus on the second component, which studied how objects, places, people, and practices from the Iron Age to the early medieval past of Britain and Europe were leveraged to frame, support, or oppose populist nationalist ideologies in the context of social media activism. And the stress here was primarily to understand the extent to which certain ideas about the past were used to express political identities and the political futures that people were hoping to see materialized. We wanted to really see how people drew on the past and molded different ideas about it into simple myths of origin, resistance, and collapse. These were derived as categories from our work. In order to mark divisions between an inside us and an outside them, both vertically as the people versus the elite, and also horizontally as people living in a certain territory versus foreign others. And big social media data was key to addressing this topic for two main reasons that are connected with the twofold nature of social media. The first is social media space, a space where populism and populist nationalism and these kinds of sentiments and ideologies are cultivated by certain parties and certain party leaders. The first reason is related to the fact that on these platforms, these kinds of sentiments are cultivated by parties and party leaders, and are also openly expressed by some of those who sympathize with those politicians and parties, and with other disgruntled internet users. Paolo Gerbaudo, who's a sociologist, political sociologist, but also digital culture expert, has argued that in populist movements, social media platforms like Facebook, for example, are both the people's voice and the people's rally, because they allow communicating with millions of people, so at scale, in mass, and because being forms of direct communication, they can also host rebellious narratives. The second reason why we found social media data useful is that this is data and found data. So it is spontaneously offered by people and allows capturing and examining very rare occurrences that would be quite difficult to examine otherwise, like those rare occurrences where people verbalize what is an actually really internalized process of drawing on one's experience of the past to think about and relate to contemporary social, political, economic issues. Now, of course, to balance out this enthusiasm, I'll link back to what Richard was saying at the beginning. Being found data means that this data is not raw, it's pre-cooked with business agendas in mind. And this, of course, has a number of very complex methodological, ethical, technical implications in terms of research design and implementation. As regards data collection and the ideas and principles that informed it in our case, there are quite a few things to say, but here I'll focus on three core aspects. So the first, again, goes back to the idea of publicness and what we can consider as a public or a private space. We focused on those spaces, and this is a quite common position within social media research, where people could reasonably expect to be observed by a stranger. And by observe, I mean also in automated way, not just qualitatively. So we focused on public Facebook pages, where people go and know they can be read by strangers, and on collections of Twitter, of tweets that contain specific hashtags of relevance to us. And by including the hashtag, you usually want to signal that you have the desire to link to a public and wider discussion that is taking place. Now, of course, this also hides the assumption that a Twitter user would know this practice and implement it. And this is also fair to observe. Second point that I wanted to cover is data variety and how to take these into account in order to ensure comparability between different case studies. In our case, we wanted to also look at how different myths were circulated in relation to political events unfolding in different countries. The UK with Brexit, the US presidential elections, Italy the 2018 general elections. We ensure that we had shared data core made up of public Facebook pages of key parties and party leaders, and collections including specific hashtags. But then each case study also had additional and very bespoke data that was characterizing only that case study. For example, the Twitter collections that were already available, like the one collected by Harvard and focusing on the 2016 presidential elections, or the one that we collected and consisting of public Facebook pages containing the term Brexit. The other point is linked to data variability, variety, variability, and the velocity of change. And how to ensure that we can actually implement a certain design plan over the course of the project. And the only really convincing way of doing this is by ensuring that we are able to respond quite quickly to the changes that are implemented by social media platforms and external policy. So we mentioned previously the changes within the Facebook API, impossibility now without a developer account to extract comments and replies on public Facebook pages. This introduces a change. It means that you will have part of the data, including posts, comments and replies, part of the data not including them unless you register the developer account. So all these points, I think, really highlight the need to engage with technicity and to engage with the technical aspects of the research as well, in order to ensure that you have a greater control on how you develop it and how you develop your Now, having talked a little bit about the data collection plan, how to approach data analysis. And here our work in terms of thinking and reflection was quite influenced by the qualitative approach that was conceptualized by Latour, Jensen, and Venturini and published as a paper in 2012. In this article, the authors argue that digital data sets can be navigated without making the distinction between the level of the individual component and that of the aggregated structure. And as also argued, for example, by Block and Pedersen in another paper in 2014, this is an approach to social research that aims to recompose the dimensions of the micro and the macro, the whole and its parts, by constantly moving between them. It's an approach that is usually visualized through network analysis, because that is the most intuitive way of doing so. We tried to develop it from a conceptual point of view a bit more in a different way. So we did not follow individuals through their connections, but rather ideas about the past and how they were used, moving from data intensive to very close-up kinds of analysis and back. And for this analysis, we developed routines using primarily R, free and open source software, and to a much more limited extent for a paper done on Brexit, also with Marta, Python. And I'll quickly exemplify how we moved between different approaches. And I'll draw on the two subsets of the UK and the Italian case study. So, for example, how we operated on the collection of 1.4 million posts, comments, and replies extracted from public Facebook pages containing the word Brexit. We first looked qualitatively through the metadata available at this space and how it emerged, the kind of groups that were behind the creation of the pages and were possible through the analysis of URLs and other information provided in the description, also their relation and link to offline groups. Then we used topic modeling to tease out what the themes, the topics that were recurring across the corpus and within the subset of documents that contained mentions of the past, which were located through a set of keywords that we had compiled through desk-based research at the beginning and encompassed people and places from the Iron Age, Roman, early medieval past of Britain, but also ways of referring to these periods. Now here, we already started to move from big data to small data, because this subset is made of just a few thousands of documents. So we progressed with almost semi-quantitative techniques and very simple term frequencies and term associations that allowed us to first understand which kinds of ideas about the past were most recurring, and then starting to reconstruct in a very sketchy way the context of their occurrence. And with these techniques, we could also orientate our more qualitative work, making more strategic decisions about what to focus on with the close-up readings. And this was the kind of work that then allowed us to understand which specific myths were used and how they were played out by different camps. A quick mention of the Italian case study. We operated in a similar way here, using topic modeling and also cluster analysis to look at the topics that were present on party and party leaders' Facebook pages, for example, and then also on the subsets with period-specific terms, and then using simple quantitative techniques to orientate qualitative kinds of analysis, resulting in the emergence of sometimes comparable, sometimes not comparable myths, that we could discuss together with the others emerging from the UK and the US case study. The examples that I've shown have been using data-intensive methods, particularly, well, in a quite iterative way, but certainly more at the beginning of the analysis. And they were important, as I said, to orientate also more qualitative kinds of investigations. But the knowledge on the whole that our study produced is more similar to the knowledge you produce through ethnographic immersive research. So we exposed a range of uses of the past, and we could discuss the kinds of ideas about the present that they were linked to, but we did not talk about population and sampling, and we cannot claim representativeness in terms of specific groups within society, for example. We can't say that certain ideas were recurring more amongst certain groups than others, defined against social dimensions, for example, because we didn't have that data. And also it's important to remember that this data that we've been looking at has been changing constantly. There's constant, it's a moving target. So it is the kind of knowledge that we've produced in order to be then tied to specific groups within society. If we wanted to do that, would need further analysis, and possibly also offline kinds of analysis. And it is for this reason that we've been calling this approach that we've been using as data-intensive ethnography. Because even if there is data-intensive techniques, they are there technically, but ultimately they expose a variety of uses that is compatible with the results of essentially ethnographic qualitative research. My conclusions then would be, first, that I believe that big data is of great relevance to digital heritage research, even if you just mind the context of one Facebook page, because it is important to know that the page does not exist in isolation, which we might be tempted to do. It's connected with others in this complex, huge, multi-level, variable, flexible deluge of data, but also spaces and traces of human activities. So you cannot fully understand even that little component without trying to engage conceptually with the idea of big data. Second, research that uses big data to address heritage-focused problems might be, as in our case, mostly ethnographic at its core, even when, as I was saying, it is technically data-intensive. This definitely means that only certain research questions can be approached with this in this way. It is important that these questions are really well framed and thought through from a conceptual and theoretical point of view. Thank you.